Hello, and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and manga too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I am so pleased to have Nick Martell, author of The Legacy of the Mercenary King trilogy, onto the podcast, not to talk about his books, but to talk about manga.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. And yeah, I'm not going to talk about books in the slightest. I'm not here for that. This is purely about ridiculous manga.
All right, but before we get into that, Nick, what's something great that happened recently?
Let's see. I just handed in a book to my agent. That will actually be the last of the writing, my own writing I mentioned. I did it yesterday, so that's it. I'm good. I'm kind of free to do whatever I want now, so it'll be exciting.
Congratulations.
That's fantastic.
Thank you. Hopefully he likes it. I don't get an email back that just says, Nick, we need to talk. So
well, our fingers are crossed for you.
Thank you.
My good thing is that I planted 5 citrus trees in my father's yard recently.
Now, you classically have too much citrus. So what were you thinking?
I do have too much citrus. I was thinking that eventually I'm going to move from my current place into my father's place, and I will want to have too much citrus there because I won't have access to the many citrus trees that I have here.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well,
just planning for the future. Sounds perfect.
Yes. I mean, what's that phrase? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
So You're just doing the 20 years ago part, 20 years
Exactly.
Early. All right. Very forward thinking of you.
And your good thing, Lily?
My husband had his last day in the office this week. He is officially a free man, doesn't have to do any day job anymore, which is very exciting for us. It means I never have to do dishes again, and he has time to work on his art. So that's very nice.
Awesome.
Congratulations to him.
And me. I don't have to do dishes anymore.
Congratulations to you too.
Thank you. All right. What is everyone drinking today? I, thematically appropriately, am having a whiskey highball, which Sarah explains is a very popular drink in Japan that I do not remember at all. Perhaps poignantly.
I don't think we actually ever drank whiskey highballs when you visited me in Japan.
No.
That is also what I'm drinking, though.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. I'm being very lame. I just have like a mini Coke. I was eating pizza earlier, and I was like, I know pizza and Coke goes perfectly. I have to drink it.
Well, there you go. That's even more thematically appropriate, although with dinner instead of with the podcast. That's allowed. One last interrogation before we jump into the fun part. Has anyone read anything good lately? Dead silence.
Let's see. I just finished reading a book called The Will of the Many by James Islington. It doesn't come out till May, so I feel like a very cool kid because I'm the only one who's read it right now, and I really loved it. I gotta send the blurb in actually for it. But yeah, so that I would highly suggest everyone checking that out in May or June. I really should have brought the book up here to clarify when it's releasing. But yeah, it's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Have not read anything besides podcast books, which are good, but they don't qualify for this question as a response for this question. So
no, we'll talk about them plenty later. I have so much not read anything lately that I have not even read our podcast books for this week. So that'll be great. But that's not what we're here to talk about, my procrastination. No, we are here to talk about manga. And I thought we could start, actually Sarah thought we could start, but I'm stealing it, with talking about how we got into it presumably back in the day. Nick, this isn't like something you discovered last week and were like, oh my God, I need to tell everyone about this.
No. Sadly, I didn't, binge read like 20,000 volumes of manga this past week. It would be really impressive, but sadly, I'm doing this a long time.
How'd you discover it?
I was trying to think about that recently, actually, because I think I just started, I read a lot of fantasy books growing up, and then you go to a Barnes and Noble, and eventually you go to the comics, and I read, my dad was big into comics, and then eventually there was this other aisle that was filled with manga, and back when I was reading manga, it wasn't like as it is now, where it's almost bigger than fantasy and sci-fi sections, where it's like, I walk into my local Barnes and Noble, it's like 10 bookshelves at least. Back when I started reading, there was, maybe one, and you had to wait like 9 months for the next volume to come out. Like it was brutal. I think I had been started reading it since I was like, I don't know, like 12 or something. Like I've been reading manga pretty much as long as I've been reading fantasy or comics. So to me, it's just another great medium to enjoy. What about you guys?
I think that's basically my origin story too. I didn't read American comics. No one in my family has a history of reading them, and I don't particularly care for the artwork personally. But I went to Barnes and Noble, meandered over to the like YA fantasy section, picked up, I'm pretty sure it was Inuyasha, the first one that I picked up. And
Classic.
yes,
Yeah.
a classic. And then sat in Barnes and Noble reading volumes of manga for many, many hours. I will confess it's been a while since I've read any, just because like manga's expensive.
Yes.
And like there are so many volumes, and I'm like, I don't have the space and the time for that.
Yeah, manga is so expensive, but that's a whole different thing.
And then there was that one friend who knew how to pirate it, and you were like, what is this black magic?
I did pirate a lot of manga. To be fair, that was before. I think Viz now has like an app where you can read a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But they didn't back when I was pirating manga.
Look, I cannot condone piracy, but I may have also dabbled in it when I was young. I think you kind of had to, based on like how manga used to be like 10, 15 years ago, where it was not available. If you wanted to catch up, you find out there was like 30 volumes ahead of where you were at, and you're like, just gonna go read it. And then I started buying them, as I got older with more money, and they started getting rapidly translated. But it was kind of part of a manga community where people were like, yeah, here's where you can go read manga, where you want to catch up on like Naruto, like it's ending. I mean, in the US, you're like, it's ending? We haven't even seen them age up yet. Like, so yeah, I'm with you there. I can't condone it anymore. I also.
It was a different time.
Yeah,
It
and
was a
like it's
different time.
not necessary these days because it's so much easier to find manga. But like back when I was reading Prince of Tennis, for example, there were 7 volumes out in the US and 43 out in Japan or something. And I was like, well, I'm not waiting a month between each volume. I'm just going to go read the other 33 that I still have left to read.
Yeah, no.
Also, it was 30 volumes that were like $10 each and take 20 minutes to read, which is rough.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that like in the US at least, they never really got the same thing like over in Japan with like Shoujo Jump or like the actual magazines where you could pick up one of those and it's like I used to know the price of it like $8 or something. You'd get like 13 chapters, 13 different things, and you could read whatever you wanted. Pricing to the States and Japan is massively different. It's brutal on the wallet.
It is brutal. Lily, you haven't said yet how you got into reading manga.
I am going to show you all up because I have a much better story.
You do?
Not really. It was 6th grade. I was about to give the name of my elementary school, but that's probably a bad idea. Shannon showed up with Rave Master in class, and she lent it to me, and then I and our friend Amanda just read all of them during lunches, just like we would trade them. As one finished, you'd give the volume to the next person. So I was like 11. Yeah, good times. Rave Master. I could not tell you a single thing that happened in that series, and I've read like 50 of them. I used to own them. I did cull my manga collection recently. I know. They're so big.
It's okay.
Heavy.
I still own them. If you ever want to know what happened, just let me know. I'll send you pictures of each chapter or something. Like,
oh, good. It's so funny to think I spent so much time reading this series and I have almost no recollection. I remember having a huge crush on Musica. That's all I remember.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, he was the guy with like the earrings, right? Like,
yeah,
and the dark hair, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that makes perfect.
All I remember.
I remember reading them when I went over to your house, but I couldn't tell you the plot at all.
The only thing I remember Ape Master is he could change his sword. He could like constantly, like his sword would always be changing. He could like make it massive and really skinny. And I remember thinking as a kid, that was the coolest thing ever, where it's like, yeah, what's the point of having like 5 swords when you could have one that's changing based on the scenario? Oh man, I'm going to reread that now. I'm like going to go over to my bookshelf and start reading it after this.
Excellent. That is secretly the purpose of this episode, is to make us all like dig up the manga we read decades ago and dive back in. That's the other thing, though. I remember the first time I tried to join into a conversation about manga and realized that I was out of date. And this was only like 5 years later, right? Like whatever the popular title is in fan conversations just changes so quickly. You have to be on top of it and completely engaged with that like world. Otherwise you get left behind so fast.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I'll be real. I read manga probably every day just because to me it's palate cleanser. Like I don't have to, it's not like heavy like a book sometimes is, or like writing. I like it more than American comics for different reasons. But it's yeah, if I miss like 2 weeks, I'm like, oh God, I gotta like read like, 100 chapters to catch up to everything because it's constant. Like there's a chapter coming out every week. And nowadays that simulpubs are a thing. Like you'll get it at the same time as they'll get in Japan. You're like, oh no, like I got to catch up. And like, it's really an addictive cycle of like, oh man, I got to keep reading, keep reading, keep reading.
I think if I had all of the time in the world, I would get back to reading manga. But it's because of that weekly, like serialized format. It's just so hard. And then, like you say, you skip a couple of weeks and suddenly you're behind so much.
Yeah, and nowadays Simulpub, they only like if you look at the Shonen Jump app, they essentially say you can read everything once for free. But then after that, they only put like the 3 earliest and the 3 latest chapters. So if you forget about something for 4 weeks, you got to go pay for it, and you're like, I don't want to do that. Like, so you got constantly got to be keeping up.
You're on that grind, that manga reading grind.
Yeah, it's really a sport at this point.
So the idea that sparked this conversation was that you wanted to talk about increasingly weird manga. But I thought, okay, well then, which one do you consider to be the least weird?
Oh, the least weird. So you got to give me a second. I've been keeping a list of these on my phone.
That's dedication.
Like I said, I read a lot, and I got big into recently. I don't want to say recently. It's like a few years ago. A lot of translation groups. So I buy the Japanese comics online because now they sell them everywhere. And then I don't feel bad about reading fan translations anymore. Where like because people are really dedicated about translating the latest chapters as fast as you can. But there was always that morality part where I was like, oh man, I'm 28 now. I can't just be pirating stuff anymore. I'm a writer. It really doesn't look good. So now I buy them online and I'm like, all right, I buy the raws. And I'm like, I can't read Japanese, but I don't feel bad about reading people who can translate them now. But I'd say like the least weird are probably like, actually, I take that back. I was going to say like Shonen Jump. And I'm like, Naruto opens up with him turning into a naked woman. Like, I don't know if I could really like say that. That probably is the least weird. Like the bigger ones, like the Dragon Ball Z, the Naruto, like the Inuyasha, the things that become kind of main culture where you're like, that's anime when people see it. Those are probably the least weird, but they're still very weird at very different times. But for something not mainstream yet, I would say like Beastars is a pretty like if you're like dipping your toes into manga beyond where it's literally about animals in the school, and there's a wolf who doesn't want to eat prey anymore, and it's his struggles not eating this rabbit he falls in love with, and that's the plot. And it gets really good and really weird at the same time because you're like, wow, I never thought I'd identify with this wolf's struggles of trying not to eat the person they're attracted to. Like, it's bonkers, like from the initial concept of it. But that's kind of what I love about manga, is that they can take these outrageous ideas and they can hyper focus on like, okay, I'm going to do this one little thing and I'm going to see how far I can go with it. So maybe that's my least weird. Beastars is probably what I would say. Like, it's really good. Art's fantastic. Story's good. And it's still like a little weirder than something you're going to find in like Dragon Ball Z.
So it sounds like you mostly read shonen genre manga.
Oh, no.
No.
Oh, no.
All right.
I read everything. Like,
Okay.
I read like Shoujo or like Fruits Basket. Like,
Is that still going?
no.
Oh, okay.
They released a new anime, updated anime where they actually like did it properly. It looks fantastic. Fruits Basket and Oran Host Club is just absolutely bonkers.
Is Oran still going?
Nope.
Okay.
So I feel like I read everything. Like I really do. I find them all interesting for different reasons. I have a lot of really dumb opinions on a lot of different manga. Like I have a very strong opinion on why harem manga are successful, or like why like Shonen Jump are successful, or things like that. Yeah, so I read everything.
So why do you think harem manga are successful?
Okay.
Do you think it's farther than just wish fulfillment? Like, that seems like a
Yes.
pretty obvious answer. Okay.
Yeah. I actually highly believe, and it's going to sound stupid when I say it without giving the context, it's like sports. Because in harem mangas, a lot of it comes from, there's one main character. It doesn't matter if it's like a reverse harem or like a harem manga. And most of the ones people really talk about are the ones where any of the people can end up with the main person. So it ends up, you get this, like, especially when you go into like these like discords of groups who are like fans of like this one particular harem manga, they're rooting for the character they want to like end up and win as if it's a sports team. And it's bonkers where it's like, yeah, go, like, it's a good one. There's this manga I was really invested because I chose the right person. I thought I got it right. And I got it right. And I was so excited. So I went into Discord, and it's a lot of these people. There was 5 people in the harem that could have been the one he marries at the end. And I chose one. I was like, I think it's gonna be this person. And I was so invested based on like, am I going to be right? And I think that's kind of why it replicates an instinct of like, okay, I really like this character. They're going to win. I want them to win. And it's kind of like, it is to have that wish fulfillment, obviously, but it also has that like, I'm going to root for this sports team. I'm going to root for the football team I think is going to win. And it becomes this kind of like, no, you're going to lose. And you throw like foreshadowing at the person. You're like, oh, this moment's better than this moment. And you're like, you're talking about fictional characters dating. It's like bonkers. And I love it.
So that element of competition is really compelling.
Yeah, and that's more of a thing that's nowadays than it was like say 10 years ago. A lot of the big harem mangas back then were like there's the old classic trope, first girl wins. Whoever shows up first usually wins. And especially in things like say like I'd say Fruits Basket is actually a really good example where like it's not as quite as clear because there's 2 distinct people who can be, and technically there's more, but it really becomes 2 of them, or even Oran Host Club less so. But Fruits Basket is a great one where you don't really know who's going to win. So it develops that core of like mystery, like, oh, is it going to be this person? It's classic, like it brings out the best aspects of why people liked love triangles to begin with. And now why everyone hates them because it's, well, you could tell who their main character is going to end up with in most love triangles. But for a lot of these like harem manga, they try to really sneak it and be like, okay, this person maybe is going to person. So it feels that classic, like, oh, it's all about love, but at the same time, it's competition. And I'm rambling a lot about harem manga right off the bat.
I mean, we're off to a good start. Do you think then that more people enjoy it nowadays because it's easier to find that sense of community where you're talking with people about like who is going to win, who's going to get the main character versus previously when things were a little less online or less available, it was harder to have that community like competition aspect with anyone but yourself?
I mean, yeah, you pretty much hit it nail on the head. Like, because you can have that community where you're talking to people about like a very niche topic, but because it comes out weekly, you can kind of have something to talk about them every week. And it's kind of like, okay, maybe this thing did better or this thing happened. In manga in general, I really think has really mastered that weekly format of keeping their audiences engaged, kind of like TV does, or mainly used to before streaming became a huge thing. But yeah, these like communities can form like 10, 15 years ago. If I want to talk to someone about like Naruto or One Piece, I'm like really throwing it out there because like it was not a popular thing back then. Like you kind of, like as Lily was saying with the Raid Master, like I felt like I had to do like in the dead of night, like hand them in like a paper bag where it's kind of like, don't let anyone see this. Like, but nowadays you can go into a Discord channel for whatever pretty much manga anime you want to. Like, if I really wanted to, I could log into one, right about, I don't even know, like a sports manga, which are more niche than like something like One Piece or Naruto or like those things. Like, it's crazy how the sense community has like really bolstered a lot of these things.
Yeah, I remember back when I was in my like biggest, I don't want to say phase, but when I read the most manga, like going to LiveJournal and looking for specific communities. And you would find maybe like 1 or 2. And now it's so much easier to find Discord channels and servers that talk about manga and anime and specific shows.
Yeah, and it's really cool. Like it is, like it fosters that sense of community that, you didn't get nowadays. And it's, there's a lot to say about social media, and I don't like social media personally because sometimes I'm like, oh man, it really messes with my head at times. But like finding someone who's only like, people just want to talk about this one niche subject, or like, yeah, I'll talk to you about One Piece. Like it does. I'm not like talking about anything like that's really life or death. Like I'm talking about who could win in a fight between like Luffy or one of the admirals. Like you couldn't do that. And I think it really helps people develop kind of a connection to the media as a whole and also like the story they're telling. Like, now I'm just going to go on a whole different rabbit hole. But I find that almost the more you talk about a subject or some kind of manga or like a harem manga where you become emotionally invested, you become emotionally invested because the more time you spend on it, so the more time you talk about it, the more time you argue about it, the more you become invested in that piece of medium. And that's kind of why I think harem mangas in particular kind of like sports, because it almost becomes this blinders, like, I'm going to root for the Green Bay Packers no matter what happens. I'm invested in our success. And at the same time, you know, sometimes a partner will have to go to our friend who's a diehard Jets fan, and she'll have to be like, dude, it's a football game. No, nothing's wrong. It's just a football game. And he's just like, but they didn't do this. And they're just like, it's a football game, man. It's okay. Your day's going to keep going.
It reminds me of the sense of community from anime conventions, which are they as big as they used to be? I feel like I don't hear about them as much anymore, but maybe that's a me problem.
I feel like that's a you problem.
Okay.
To be honest.
That was very possible, yeah.
I think I may have to be corrected here, but I think a lot of them became also like grouped into Comic-Con. Like anime kind of became like more pop culture things. So they went to Comic-Cons, like, but I think there's still a fair amount of anime conventions, but I don't get to think of them.
I mean, so I just Googled Fanime, which is, I think, the biggest anime convention, specific anime convention that I went to.
Did you never go to Anime Expo?
I worked Anime Expo once.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess Anime Expo is the biggest one that I've been to, but I wouldn't necessarily say that I wasn't an attendee at that one because I was working at
You were present. You were physically present.
I was physically present, yes. And I know, like, I have friends who work at Viz and they go to, like, Anime Expo all of the time. But just Googling Fanime, it says that they had 34,000 people attend in 2019. So I'm pretty sure anime conventions
still going strong.
Yeah, it sounds like they're doing fine.
Yeah, I don't know. So we used to go to a very small local convention in San Francisco, and I don't know if that's still going.
Well, and even when it was, it switched from anime to animation real quick. Nick, kind of to your point that as it becomes less niche, it sort of starts absorbing all of the nerd culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it becomes less like specific and special in that way, which is interesting.
It's fascinating. I'd probably, you know, I can't say this because, you know, I wasn't born in the 70s or 80s, but I would say probably what people used to think about like D&D was, where it was a very niche hobby, was kind of like how anime was with me growing up, which is because it was that really niche hobby. It was that really kind of like, you watch anime, read manga, like, are you okay? And it kind of became part of the pop culture thing. Like now kids are wearing anime sweatshirts everywhere. And I'm like, I would have gotten beaten up for that. Like I couldn't have done that back then, but it's cool. It's you know, how pop culture evolves is really fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how much more mainstream it's become. There's a car on my street that I pass occasionally that has a Hunter x Hunter like decal on it, and you never would have seen that, you know, 10 years ago.
No, but that's absolutely incredible. I find the people who do that, I'm like, love it. I would never do it, can't do it myself, but like, props, dude. Like, absolutely go for it.
I really want to like leave a note on their windshield saying I love your decal. I haven't yet, but
I think you should. I bet it'll make their day because like you have immense pride if you're putting it on your car.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's like a whole level. You're like, the world needs to be told about Hunter x Hunter.
Yes. And it's not like, it doesn't say the title or anything, but it's a picture of like Gon on there, one of the passenger side windows. And I'm like, I see you, person who owns this car.
Oh, that's awesome. That's just so cool.
There are still very cringy expressions of fandom, though. Can I do my like old man shakes fist at sky and complain about Aheago? Is that the word I'm looking for? The hentai faces.
Oh, like the hentai sweatshirt thing?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Ahegao. And like the pictures themselves aren't explicit, but like what's happening, and that's just deeply uncomfortable. Could everyone not?
Yeah,
Am I old and boring now? I don't think so.
nah, I'm with you. I'm like, that's what I'm like. I don't know why, man. Why are you doing that? Like, why are you wearing that?
Yeah. It's just that feels like less of an expression of fanhood and more just trying to be edgy, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there.
Yeah. But then they get mixed up in the whole thing, giving everyone a bad name.
Yeah, I don't think anime and manga fans need that much help, but it definitely goes them down. Like,
All right, so we've mentioned manga. There is also anime, which is usually an adaptation of manga. Is it always?
Not always. I think it's often an adaptation, but it's not always.
Okay. I guess I can think of movies that weren't, but I can't think of any like series that I watched that weren't.
There definitely are series that don't have a source material.
I can actually give you a great one that doesn't have a source material. Odd Taxi. It's essentially a mystery about a cab driver. Stuff happens in a town full of animals. I realize now that the two things I mentioned are both animals as people, so really going down starting off strong, but there's no manga adaptation of that. I thought it was a fantastic anime when I watched it.
Is it available easily accessible on streaming here?
Yeah, I want to say it's on like Funimation or Crunchyroll or one of those two. I think I watched it on Crunchyroll. Yeah, it's on Crunchyroll. It's very good. I thought it was actually really well done.
I know that we were talking about how enjoyable it is that manga comes out every week, but I feel like that serialized format really rewards bad storytelling sometimes. Just the idea that the longer you can draw something out, the longer you'll have readership is just not like conductive to a tight plot line.
I mean, I think it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
Because you do get more of what you enjoy, but sometimes it stops being enjoyable.
So can I go on another exciting rant?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
So there's this manga, and I think it's an anime now too, called, oh God, once again, terrible names I'm about to say. It's called Rental Girlfriends. And it's more popular nowadays, but essentially the premise of this guy gets dumped and he essentially rents a girlfriend to go on a date with him. And it's something that should have lasted like 100 chapters or like 2 seasons. And it's currently up to like, I want to say like 275 chapters. I think it's on season 2 or 3. And its own fans are rebelling. Like they're all actively like, if you go to like the groups or any of these like threads where where like a new chapter anime gets released, they're actively being like, this should have ended like 40 chapters ago. The mangaka doesn't know what he's doing. Like, what is going on? Like, oh man, we're been trapped in this hotel for like 40 chapters. And that's not an exaggeration. There literally was an arc that lasted like 40 chapters where it was like one day in a hotel. And it's crazy because like, I can't do that. Sorry, I brought up writing. Sorry. I was told I wasn't going to do that. Hypothetically, writers can't do that. You have to constantly be moving the plot forward. But like this one manga is like just like repeating over and over again. And it feels like it's milking the products because they're like, we don't want it to end. So that's my example of fans actively rebelling. I think the day that manga actually ends, people will be happier. Not even because there's an ending, just because it's like it's over. They're free. They don't have to keep coming back every week because it can be like kind of like I don't want to say addiction, but like you're like, all right, maybe something happened this week. And you kind of like gambling and rolling the dice. Be like, is something gonna happen now? No, it's more of the same. They're talking about the same thing. To the point that people have actually edited the panels down. So they're saying like there's 20 pages that these, fan translators and fans have edited what's only the relevant bits. So it's like 2 pages. They're like, this is the only relevant panels. You're not everything else. You're good. We don't need to have bystanders complimenting how attractive the main character is. And I really wish I wasn't like over exaggerating this. This is literally the manga.
But that's so alienating for readers because at some point, they're just going to drop off if there's no. I mean, like it is an addiction, and you do think like, oh, maybe like you were saying, like maybe this week it's going to be different, but eventually people are just going to stop reading.
There's that sunk cost fallacy, right? I've spent 270 chapters on this. I'm not going to give up now.
Yeah, and just imagine how terrible would it be if they missed the one chapter something actually happens. Like they'd be so mad. I'd be mad if I read something for like 300 chapters and suddenly 301 was like, and everything ended. I'd be like, I should have stuck it out one more week. It would have been worth it.
Well, at that point, you can come back, I feel. But if it's like you read 300 chapters and then you drop off and then it continues for another 50, that's just not worth it.
So fun fact about this, like rental manga, like I know too much. I'm in too deep, but Reddit is a big thing for manga. A lot of the communities are on there. Reddit has like Reddit Gold, Reddit like awards. To the point that the fans of this manga were getting so annoyed people were dropping off, they would spontaneously and randomly award chapters where nothing happened, like 200 awards, to lure people back in, to just be like, you thought something happened? Sorry, nothing did. Because, traditionally in a lot of these, like where things happen in threads, like they get a lot of awards. And you're just thinking like you're actively entrapping other people to come back and be like, no, you're suffering with me. Like, no. You can't leave. You have to stay here with me because I'm not enjoying this. You're going to not enjoy this. And we're all going to make fun of how much we're not enjoying this together.
I think that was one of the aspects that made me drop off from manga. I do still watch anime occasionally, and that's something that I think anime can really improve on. When it's adapting something that is way too long, it can cut out a lot of that bullshit and end up making a much tighter story. I think Hunter x Hunter is a good example of that. Speaking of. Although sometimes anime also drags on too long if it's just trying to go with the ongoing thing.
I think it's just also how anime evolved. Like it used to be that like Naruto and One Piece or like these things they'd run out of source material, then they'd have all these filler arcs. So they became more seasonal anime where they're like, all right, if we don't have anything to adapt, we're just not going to adapt this popular show for like a year or so. We're just going to let it be. But yeah, the anime can do great. But at the same time, like, do you really want to watch like 400 episodes of Naruto Shippuden where nothing happens at all?
Oh, and this is where you find out I'm a dub monster, but you can multitask if you're watching anime.
It's okay. I watch dub too. My partner hates it.
Oh, they've gotten a lot better.
I
used to be subtitled only, but they've gotten so much better with the voices recently.
They're actually putting budgets into it because it got popular.
Yeah.
I still prefer subtitles, but I studied Japanese, so it's not as big of an ask for me as it is for someone who doesn't know the language.
So I have a question. Were you one of the kids who started reading manga or like, I'm going to learn Japanese? Were you actually one of the people who did that? Like, I wanted to be that kid, but I wasn't dedicated enough to be that kid.
Yeah, Japanese is hard.
I excuse it by saying that I actually am a quarter Japanese. It's true. I don't look it, but I am a quarter Japanese. So I had an interest in learning the language before manga and anime. But like the real reason probably is, I was that child.
Hey, whatever gets you to learn language, I say is go for it. I'm jealous. I wish I was that kid.
I mean, and like that was what I majored in university. I spent a lot of time in Japan studying the language, and I don't use it at all now. So you're not doing any worse than I am.
That's still really cool though.
You're gonna start watching anime in Japanese with no subtitles.
Actually, that is when you were talking about watching dubs and like just walking away and doing other things. That is one of the things I like to do, not specifically with anime because I don't actually watch a lot of anime these days, but with like podcasts and stuff, I like to have it on just in the background for the ear training. So I'm not actually like actively listening, but it does help with your listening comprehension and all of that. Just hearing the language and, picking out words and sentences that you understand or don't understand.
Sarah, this is not a scholarly podcast. Get out of here with your study tips.
I'm sorry. I mean, yeah, that's actually, so fun fact, when I was in Japan doing a year-long study course, they judged me the most improved at the end of the year. And it's all because I went to a lot of theater, which obviously doesn't have subtitles. A lot of it was really stupid stuff like the musical Prince of Tennis. I saw a lot of musical Prince of Tennis. But it's because I was going to these things where you don't understand what's going on. You just have to listen and hope that you get a little bit of why these two tennis people are throwing an invisible light tennis ball at each other and, arguing.
Sarah, would you consider the musical adaptations of the anime and manga Prince of Tennis better than the original?
I would say they're more enjoyable just because there's a lot of songs.
All right. Nick, what about you? Is there an adaptation that you think is better than the original?
I don't know. That's a hard question. I think they're each so different because I really like some adaptations where, the action, like, all right, here's a good one. Haikyuu, the sports manga about volleyball. I really enjoy watching that one because the action flows really well because it's all about sports and it's bang, bang, bang and going back and forth. But you kind of lose out on the art style, like the manga, because like really adapted. So I don't know if I like it more, but I definitely like, if you put Haikyuu on, I'm gonna watch it because I'm like, yeah, I really want to watch like some guys like hit around a volleyball. Like this is peak adrenaline for me right now.
All right. What about the opposite? So I already said that there's a lot of things that I DNF'd just because it sort of fizzled out and I stopped following them. But was there anything that you DNF'd with prejudice?
Yeah, I read a lot manga, and I also stopped reading a lot of manga. And I'm trying to think of one that I just absolutely hated. If either of you guys got a better one, just give me a second. Let me think of something good.
I mean, for example, I stopped reading Fruits Basket purely because I ran out of money.
But that's not DNFing with prejudice.
No, exactly. That's an example of the opposite. I stopped watching the anime because I think I was only able to get the dubs, and that was back when the dubs were absolutely horrendous.
The original Fruits Basket wasn't that long, the anime.
Maybe I was annoyed at how short it was compared to the manga. Anyway.
I know we watched really bad dubs of Yakitate Japan because I bought DVDs of that on eBay that were clearly pirated and translated from the Chinese. So they had really, really weird subtitles.
Oh, that's right. Because I remember the version of Ouran High School Host Club. All of their names in the subtitles were in Chinese. Like, I didn't know any of the characters' names, like their real names, for a very long time.
That was the other one that I bought a DVD on eBay.
eBay.
Part of the experience.
Yes, part of the experience. I don't think I still have those DVDs, more's the pity.
They're a relic.
I did stop reading Rental Girlfriend because it got ridiculous and nothing happened. I did stop reading Bleach or watching Bleach because it also just got ridiculous because they were just constantly like, oh man, you want to fight? All right, here's a god. And you're just like, oh man, like, why does it keep going?
Also an adaptation where there's a musical version.
Man, I gotta go to Japan, I guess, and watch all these musical versions of these anime I like.
I don't think Rock Musical Bleach is still going on. But it was really good. Well, I mean, really good for a certain version of really good. I'll give that qualifier. I know they just had a Yu Yu Hakusho. I'm not sure if it was musical or just like a stage play adaptation. And I was really sad that the pandemic was going on, so I couldn't fly to Japan to see that because I probably would have.
I was supposed to go to Japan in 2021.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah, yep. Still closed. I couldn't get in. It was me and like 10 of my friends. We had like planned. We were like, oh, all of us are going to Japan. We're like huge anime, manga, and video game nerds, and just couldn't go. So missed out on watching all these, theaters and all these anime theaters. I do have one example of something I liked, but everyone else hated. That came out recently. It was called Time Paradox Writer, and it was a manga on the Shounen Jump app. And the premise of it was this failed mangaka got essentially a Shonen Jump magazine from the future, and he was really inspired by one of the things. It was like his idealization of the comic, and he ended up rewriting it because he wanted to like make it better. Turns out it didn't exist in the world. And he brought it to the editor, who had told him he was a failure, he's never going to be successful, and they said, hey, we want to publish this. And he essentially plagiarizes this story. They find out later that it's just like it's a whole paradox of things. And it was one of the few manga I don't want to say it got canceled, but the amount of hate it got by this dude who plagiarized it, even though the entire point was like this guy learns his lesson and tries to create his own thing. I've never seen a community so rally behind this one manga. Everyone was like, I refuse to read this. This is terrible. Like, man, there are like 10,000 isekais that are just filled with terrible people. But the one thing where it's like this story about plagiarism, we're like, nope, everyone's going to hate it. That's one that really stuck out to me because I really like that story. I was reading it during COVID when I was debuting, and I'm like, this is fascinating. And then it was just gone within like 10 chapters. I was like, oh, rip time paradox writer manga.
And it's not just that Viz stopped translating it, it's that like it's not available at all anymore, even in Japan.
Oh, it's still, I think, on the app, but it got canceled real quick. And like the sales of it tanked, like the volumes tanked, everything tanked. Like I remember being really invested in it because I liked it so much. And I just watched this like whole thing spiral down, where it's like it was getting 1-star reviews on Amazon, everyone claiming they were going to support an author who endorsed plagiarism. And I'm like, oh man.
Did you even read it?
Yeah, like that's what it felt like. I'm like, the entire thing's about this guy not condoning plagiarism. So it was really sad. I really wanted that one to see. I thought the premise of it was so cool about meta commentary.
That's such a fascinating example of, even if you're trying to discuss a topic and say it's bad, just even acknowledging that it exists can get you thrown in with the whole, I suppose.
Yeah. It's weird what readers will and won't respond to, I find, especially manga and writing or fantasy and everything. Because you go some certain topics, they're like, yeah, 100% killing, everything's perfect. You mentioned like a little unlikability, and they're like, nah, I refuse to read this. And you're just like, what? And then you go to manga, where it's like, yeah, it's isekais, where someone gets transported to another world. Perfect. 10,000 of those. Let's print them on demand. And then some of them like, hey, this like kind of like a villain person is kind of doing some questionable things. And they're like, not canceled. You're like, how does this work?
Yeah. But he was the villain. That was the point.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I've been saving this one. I have the worst manga, but best manga I can talk about. And I can't even say the name. I can't say the name. I got to explain it first.
Okay.
Because I don't even know where to begin with this one. So the premise of it is, it's a time loop story where this guy who is successful in his job, happily married, he starts getting jealous that his wife was his first partner, first everything. And despite they're happily married, have a wonderful life, he gets really like insecure and jealous one day, and essentially wishes to go back in time to meet her before they met, because they met her later in life. And it's essentially the plot of an incel who goes back in time and learns a lesson. and I'm not joking. Like, this thing is so now I'll say the name. It's called I Would Die to Have Your First Time. And you're like, what? And I remember someone suggested it to me because like, don't look at the name, just start reading. I swear it's not as bad as it seems. And I'm like, it's about an incel. Like, it's straight up about an incel who's like, are you kidding me? I don't want to read this. And it's a really good story, because it actually grows and develops. And as I was reading it, I thought at the same time, I'm like, why am I reading this? This is terrible. I don't want to read about this dude's struggles with misogyny. And then at the same time, I was like, oh, he's actively growing. Like, he's changing and he's developing. I'm like, hypothetically, if I was a writer, I couldn't get away with this in writing. Like, it would be so hard, because if you put them into the character's head, like, oh, do you have to do a third person? Like, you get the separation. Like, this is fascinating. But because it was in this manga art style, you can kind of like, you're like, oh, cringing. Like, dude, like, why are you doing this? Why is this happening? And you can kind of get past some of the harder moments that would be harder to do in writing, in my opinion. Really good story, terrible name, really a thematic name. And I hate that I had to talk about it, because I'm like, but it's one of the manga that really stuck out to me, where I'm like, this is terrible. And I really would recommend this to people who like, you just sit and long for the ride, and you're like, it's going to get better at some point.
So that actually makes me think of a question. Why do you think that people can get away with these kinds of stories in manga where they can't in writing without art? Is it just because you have that art and you're not necessarily in someone's head the whole time? Or
that would be my guess. I find that hypothetically with my own writing, it can kind of hard to like when you're putting people in heads of characters, they don't necessarily like actively root for them. I always called this the Sansa Stark problem, where Sansa Stark is an extremely well written character in Game of Thrones. She is absolutely brutal to read through those first two books, because she is intentionally meant to be a child who's thrown into this really complex court in politics, and she whines a lot. But what character isn't going to whine if they're suddenly like their father's about to be executed, like they're thrown alone and things. And the way that she's written, I think, is absolutely perfect for the character. But you go online or you listen to people talk, and they're like, yeah, Sansa Stark is my least favorite character in those initial books. I'm like, yeah, justified. She should be. She's a small child who's thrown into a bad situation. Or with Brandon Sanderson's work, I can't believe I'm forgetting her name, and Storm, like the arc.
Neither of us have read any Sanderson.
Never mind. All right, we'll skip that one. But I find that, yeah, these certain characters who are intentionally going to be harder to read are disliked by a lot of fans because they're not like the typical protagonists, or they're not actively solving their own problems or like pulling themselves up the bootstraps. But you're like, it doesn't make sense. Why would a young girl of like 12 be like, I'm going to survive this thing, I'm going to go crazy and kill everyone? It's not realistic for the kind of story that Martin was writing. And those characters can be hard to write. Especially in like an ensemble cast, you can have those characters because they balance out with other characters. But writing a character that's literally an incel and trying to make the readers go through that, I really don't know how you would do that, because you would lose 50% of your readers initially on that first chapter. Because I wouldn't want to read that. I'm like, I'm good. I could go online and read that if I really want to. So I think it is that separation with art, because if you're really not paying attention, you can kind of click through a few pages or like just look at the art panels and go through it. So that would be my guess.
That's very interesting, because redemption arcs are usually considered very satisfying. But now that I think about it, that's usually the villain who's being redeemed. And so to have the main character be the one who needs redemption, I can see we're trained to expect that person to be the villain and not the main character.
Yeah, I think that requires more buy-in from the reader.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to trust the author to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Trust.
And it helps if you have some kind of pretty art to look at in the meantime while you're going, oh God, I hate this person. He's so awful.
It also comes down to how much you invest in the main character. So one of my favorite examples is the original Spider-Man trilogy. Peter Parker is a little shit, and he's terrible throughout it. Obviously, the watcher sympathizes because like they know he's Spider-Man, he's juggling a lot. But when you look at his relationship with MJ, like MJ gets thrown to the curb like 20 different times, and she's still talking to him, which is a miracle, because obviously she doesn't know he's Spider-Man for a decent chunk of it. But he's just this flaky guy who liked her on and off, and like shows up and then disappears, can't even show to her play. Like, it's terrible. Like, Peter Parker is the annoying character in that film, but because he's the protagonist, he can get away with stuff. But like you said, like villains usually get that redemptive arc, and because you're not in their head, but you can see them grow and you kind of learn their circumstances, and usually get like flashbacks or explain how they got there, and you're like, oh, it makes sense now.
Is it time to ask you the question of the podcast?
Sure.
What's the weirdest manga you've read?
Oh man, I already did my incel one, thank God. No. I got plenty of them. I could just name them off. Like I said, I was starting to make a list of them. So there's one called Shiha Yafuru. It's about a card game sports manga where they essentially line up cards, and then someone listens to them, and then they have to swipe the card away from their opponent faster. And it's how is this a sport? But it's a traditional sport in Japan. I didn't know it existed, and I thought this was the most fascinating thing, watching these characters stare at these cards, listening. And then there's things like, let's see, that's about a story turns into a vampire because he's bored with humanity. This is about a dude who's literally a shogi person. He just plays shogi, and his life is terrible, but he's like, I'm going to make it better. That's actually a manga anime now. March comes in like a lion. Really beautiful.
Okay, so that's not. I mean, I guess if it's shogi, it's not Hikaru no Go, which is about a Go player.
Nope, no.
Okay.
No. Hikaru no Go also great manga. That was one of my first ones, actually. I think
I read a couple of volumes. I don't think I ever finished it, but
it's okay. The ending was not good. I think it got canceled.
oh, that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah. Let's see what else. This one's about a time loop where it's like this guy has to save this girl over and over again. This one's about like the Power Rangers, but they're all evil, and the invaders are the good people.
Oh.
This one's about two girls who hate each other, and they just try to destroy each other. There's one manga I would never recommend. It's called Boys Abyss. It is the most depressing manga. You're like, how far can this terrible thing go? And it just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. And you're like, please, all these characters just the manga needs to end so these characters stop suffering. I already mentioned Beastars, which is about, a wolf who wants to eat his girlfriend. Let's see. There's a bunch of harem manga. I don't even know.
Do you have a current favorite?
Favorite manga?
Or favorite of those that you mentioned?
Oh, those that I mentioned, I don't even know. I think it's a blur. I love them all for different reasons. Like when all these things start, new chapters get released, I'm like, yeah, let's go back into Boys Abyss, where how terrible can these things go? The whole premise of it's about a small town that essentially eats its young, where like no one escapes the small town. They just keep going further and further into despair, and you're like, oh man, this is terrible. Why am I reading this? Like, I don't want. I live in a rural town right now. I don't want to think about like being stuck here for like 30 years. My children being stuck here for 30 years. So I'd maybe recommend that one.
It's not literally eating the children.
It's not, but it's kind of is.
Okay.
It's so I guess I can talk with that one. It's a more realistic take. It is no fancy elements, but it kind of deals like how encroaching and kind of claustrophobic small town community can be, and how like characters really want to escape and get to the big city, and what that actually means and how they accomplish that, and then the familial ties and the friendship ties to kind of drag them back, and then they feel like they can't excel, and small town communities like mining things taking over the town. So that's a really good one. It's really depressing though, but let's see. I could think about other ones where this one's about a boxing manga where I'm mentioning a lot of sports, which wasn't my intention, where like this guy becomes like a god who like punches like boulders, and it's about his despair. A lot of manga about despair. This one is about handmaidens in the imperial palace who essentially is addicted to poison, and she creates poisons and cures people with them.
I think that's just medicine. I think you just described medicine.
Yes. You're not wrong. This one's about a girl who, can't say that because it's a spoiler, who wants to destroy the world. And she hires one of her beast knights who's supposed to help save the world to actually destroy it. It's Lucifer and the Biscuit Hammer.
The Biscuit Hammer?
Yes, the Biscuit Hammer. Lucifer and the Biscuit Hammer. And these are just the ones I saved on my phone where I was like, I can mention these. Manga has this cool, really amazing thing that they can take ideas and do absolutely bonkers and incredible things. Like there was artists who did this really cool thing I found incredibly fascinating, which was 100 days until this alligator dies. And they was like day one. It was just normal life, 99 normal life comics. And then that last day came, day 100. Like, is he going to die on this one? Well, I'll let people decide read that if they want to read it on their own. But there's a lot of manga, and this is why I really respect the medium, is that they will just take one idea and just go with it. And I'll be like, let's see how far I can push it. And then their pacing is really weird. It's incredible. Just because like they have to end on cliffhangers all the time because they need the readers to come back week by week. But the weirdest manga besides Boys Abyss that I'd give people to read would probably be that incel manga, because I hate it, but I really just find it fascinating, where I'm like, this should not be as good as it is. And it's really good.
Fantastic. Is there anything we didn't cover that you think everyone needs to hear about?
Probably could talk about manga for another like 4 hours, but I think that'll leave it there.
We can do a part 2 at some point.
Oh, that's good.
Maybe we all read I Would Die for Your First Time, and we can do an episode on the manga.
apologize in
Oh, that would be
advance.
fun.
I'll do it. I really would apologize in advance because it's those first I'd say 12 chapters are really brutal. You're
Yeah,
like,
but 12 chapters takes like 2 minutes to read.
not when you're stopping to cringe during it.
Oh,
That's
there you
really
go.
the
I
part.
didn't
You're
factor in
oh.
cringe time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but it is still less than like some of the 900-page books that we've read for the podcast.
True,
Dude, I read
true.
Kushiel's Dart for this bullshit. I promise it'll be better than that.
Okay, yeah. Well, I would die for your first time and come back and talk about it, and I'll say why I'm sorry I inflicted upon this all on everyone.
Sounds excellent. Well, then, Nick, I know you're not an author or anything, but if you did theoretically have a project that people should check out or keep track of, what would it be?
Theoretically, my new book that I didn't just hand in yesterday, I've been calling it my fear book. And it's essentially about people's nightmares that turn into their powers. So if you have a fear of spiders, you can essentially create webs out of your mouth. Or if you have a fear of heights, you can invert stuff. I guess the quick pitch of it is it's my Dante's Inferno style death game where everyone's trying to reach the top of something for a wish. Hypothetically, of course.
And if hypothetically you had other books out, where could people find them?
Anywhere, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, anywhere books are sold, hypothetically.
Do you have a social media presence where people can come listen to you talk about manga or non-existent books?
I usually try to keep my manga opinions out of my social media accounts because I don't want to scare too many people away.
Fair enough.
I was like, oh man, I was really sad when Discord was becoming a thing for writers and people to talk on it because I'm like, dude, I have a non-public facing Discord where I talk about One Piece in the chat. Like, I can't make this thing authorly. I can't make this a public profile. I don't want Mr. Rabbit 29 to be like, is your name Nick Martell? As I'm trying to talk about Admiral or stuff. Like, are you a writer? Are you an actual person? And I'm like, no, I want that public anonymity. But other than that, you can find me at Twitter at Mac Martell or Nick Martell Official on Instagram, probably where I'm the most active right now.
Well, wonderful. Thank you again for spending a little bit of nonsense time with us. It's been fantastic. A nice diversion from 900-page fantasy books that, not yours. I have not read yours yet, but I'm just complaining about Kushiel's Dart again because I got an opening.
I'm sorry, but I am still going to make you read Cassiel's Servant. You're not getting out of that.
Well, other than that, Nick, thank you very much. And have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We are on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.